It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Good evening, my curious friends, and welcome once again to the tide line where certainty washes away. Tonight's journey begins with something almost beautiful. Strange lights drifting in the Atlantic, shimmering like living stars caught in jelly and salt. Curiosity draws witnesses closer, and with curiosity comes interpretation, science, explanation, reassurance. But not every discovery wants to be understood, and not every expert arrives to protect what they study. No, sometimes knowledge has its own allegiances, and the sea keeps records far older than our names. As tremors stir forgotten layers beneath the waves, something ancient begins to respond. So if you're ready to listen to the ocean when it murmurs back, to consider what might awaken when the seabed shifts, then stay with me. The horizon is glowing, the currents are changing, and whatever has surfaced tonight, it remembers war. The Substance in the Sound by W.B. Stickle. Part 1. The boat's GPS began to beep, informing Hamik Kellerman that he was nearing its destination. Already, the 60-year-old Bostonian said, not looking up from his tattered copy of August Dereth's The Watchers Out of Time and others. He was almost to the end of the shuttered room and wanted to see how it finished up. When at last he reached the tale's clever conclusion, he slipped the Red Sox ticket he'd been using as a bookmark into place and slapped the thick tome shut. Not too bad, he said, hopping off his fishing chair and shuffling into his Maycraft 2700's wheelhouse. While dark fiction wasn't his typical fare, he'd opted to give the book a shot after his son, Edwin, recommended it. Given the quality of the stuff he'd read thus far, he was glad he'd taken the boy up. In the wheelhouse, he set the book aside and surveyed his GPS's oversized monitor. Seeing that he'd reached the outer edge of broad sound, he tapped the monitor twice, cancelling the alarm, and checked his wristwatch. According to it, he'd only been travelling for 19 minutes, 11 minutes faster than it usually took him to get from Deer Island to his favourite sliver of the Atlantic. Happy for the win, he brought the Maycraft out of autopilot mode and steered the boat on a straightish trajectory for about a minute longer before cutting power to its dual Yamahas. The boat coasted for another half-minute before easing to a stop. That'll do, pig, that'll do, Hamik said, quoting the movie Babe, which Edwin had made him watch over 100 times when he was a kid. Well, he would never admit it. He'd come to cherish the pig-centric film because of all those hours he and Edwin had spent watching it together, a process they'd repeated with its sequel. All right, he said, flipping the switch to deploy the Maycraft's fore and aft anchors. Enough of that mushy shit. He waited until the Maycraft jounced twice, indicating that the anchors had stopped, then ambled his way back to his fishing chair and baited a couple of lines with nightcrawlers. Those hooked, he cast one off the boat's starboard side and one off the port side. Each landed about 30 yards out. Not too shabby for an old fellow with 2 bum shoulders, eh? He said to the ocean. The ocean responded with an unimpressed gurgle and slosh. Hamik briefly considered baiting a couple more lines, but the pain now shooting through his shoulders convinced him to ditch the idea. That's okay, he told the glimmering waters. Not really here for the fishing this afternoon. No? A familiar female's voice replied in his head. Then why'd you bother to come? Well, the voice belonged to his wife, Louise, who had passed away 3 years prior of liver cancer. Goslow, I just had a shitstorm of a week, Hamik said, retaking his seat on his chair. And this is my best form of therapy. It was not uncommon for Hamik to converse with his dead wife in this way, especially when he was alone. He'd been doing it since she passed and never saw a problem with it. He wasn't stupid or mad. He understood he wasn't actually speaking to her or her ghost. What he interpreted as her voice was nothing more than his own inner thoughts reacting to the things he said aloud. Maybe it wasn't the healthiest of means to work through his grief, but Hamik didn't care. It worked for him, and it was a hell of a lot cheaper than seeing a shrink. Shitstorm, eh? Her voice inquired. Sounds bad. Bad doesn't quite capture it, Hammock confessed. Well, you're here now. May as well get it off your chest. Hammock nodded and gazed at the sea. Well, I don't have to tell you how much craziness I've dealt with during my time at Escu. By that he meant East Shore Credit Union, where he'd served as head of IT for the last 3 decades. But this week, Lo, this week took the goddamn cake. I'm not thrilled with the blaspheming, but go on. Well, Hammock confessed, it started off with a bang first thing Monday morning. Me accidentally killing the credit union CEO's dog, Petey, with my F-150. Oh no, how'd you manage that? Hammock lifted his hands and dropped them. Mr. Denfield insists on bringing the animal to work, and he likes to walk the old boy in the mornings before heading inside. For some stupid reason he opted to leave Petey off his leash. The foolish dog caught sight of a squirrel and chased it across the headquarters parking lot as I was pulling in. And that was all she wrote. That's awful. How'd Mr. Denfield take it? He was distraught, but he didn't blame me. I suspect he knew he was in the wrong with Petey being off the leash. My co-workers were less forgiving, though, looking at me like I ran Petey down on purpose. Mr. Denfield explained what happened, and they mostly backed off. Yeah, but still pretty awful. That was just Monday, Hammock agreed. On Tuesday, 3 of my top sysadmins quit in the middle of a server upgrade, forcing me to stay until 2 a.m. to make sure everything got done on time. Then on Wednesday, a drug addict tried to rob the main branch and ended up killing a teller before getting his ticket punched himself by the cops. Oh, heavens. Yeah. Thursday was only slightly better, with the entire headquarters staff coming down with food poisoning. Well, I vomited once before my Pepto kicked in, but 2 of our execs shat themselves at their desks, which brings us on to earlier today, when 3 more of my IT guys walked off the job, yammering on about low morale and crappy leadership. My crappy leadership. Hammock issued a hollow laugh. Despite the Petey incident, Mr. Denfield said he still had confidence in my ability to lead, though he sent me home early all the same. Oh, you weren't kidding, honey, his dead wife's voice stated. I'd say you earned the right to kick back with a cold one and forget your troubles for a while. Yeah, Hammock said, extracting a bottle of old Milwaukee from his cooler. Louise supporting his beer intake was a bit of a stretch, but his thoughts were his thoughts. Who was he to argue? You're right, I have. After downing all 12 ounces of the beer, he slipped on his aviator sunglasses and turned his face skyward. It was nice out, he noted, sunny and calm, with a gentle breeze wafting in from the south. No other boaters in sight. Aside from the cluster of dark clouds gathering along the northern horizon, it was damn near a perfect day. Perfect for dozing off for a nice nap, don't you think? He imagined Louise saying. Hammock shrugged and cracked open another beer. Maybe. Except there was no maybe about it, as the mere suggestion of a rest triggered a response from his pineal gland, and it wasn't long before a creeping fog spread through his extremities, causing him to yawn. Oh, Christ, he said, setting his beer in his chair's cup holder. Oh, hush now, Louise's voice urged. You hush, Hammock murmured, fighting to keep his eyelids from drooping. If he didn't know any better, he would have sworn he'd been roofied. In the end, despite his best efforts, the drowsiness won out and he drifted off to sleep. The sound of seagulls squawking jolted Hammock awake a short time later. What? He blurted out, sitting up in a panic. The abrupt movement sent an electric twinge shooting through his lower lumbar region. Oh, God, he cried, pressing a fist against his tailbone. Well, the maneuver helped, and little by little the pain subsided. Once it reached a steady-state whimper, Hammock got to his feet and began searching for the seagulls responsible for his anguish. He spotted a pair of the bastards circling above the water about 40 yards off the starboard bow, well away from his fishing line. They were circling and squawking about 20 feet above the surface. Occasionally they'd drop half that distance before zooming back up to their original height, at which point the cycle would repeat itself. "Hey," he called out to the pair. "You dipshits lost or something?" The birds exhibited no signs of having heard him. Instead, they maintained their vigil on the water and persisted with their agitated squawking. Curious what had them in such a tizzy, Hammock edged his way to the front of the boat. Though his eyesight wasn't the best, he could tell that the water they were hovering over was just as agitated as they were, the surface there practically roiling with activity. "Ah," he said, gripping the starboard handrail. "You fellas found yourselves a nice dining spot, eh? What's on the menu? I'm betting Atlantic mackerel." The seagulls shrieked a tad louder at this, as if annoyed by his inquiries, and continued with their strange little dosido. At no point did either one of them get any closer than 10 feet to the frenzied water. It was almost as if they were afraid of what lingered down there. Curiosity intensifying, Hammock retrieved his binoculars from the boat's wheelhouse and had a closer look at the roiling waters. The disturbance, he saw, was more localized than he'd initially thought. Per the binoculars' inset measuring guide, it was 12 feet at its widest and consisted of large groups of bubbles reaching the surface in big fuzzy waves. Hammock lowered the binoculars and frowned. As far as he knew, there were no underwater volcanoes in this part of the Atlantic, nor were there any major fault lines running through the Sound. None that he knew of, anyway. He supposed it could have been methane gas rising from a crack in the seafloor, but he was fairly certain their emergence didn't make the water seem as if it were boiling. They belched up a few big bubbles here and there, but nothing like what he was witnessing. Perhaps then, he ruminated, it was more biological in nature. Not a school of sea bass or Atlantic mackerel, as the seagulls would have preferred, but something larger, more majestic, like a whale coming up for air. Maybe one of those grey whales he'd heard about on the news recently. "Yeah," he said, recalling a Channel 5 segment that claimed sightings of the beast had skyrocketed this year. While he himself had never spotted a whale in the Sound, the other reported sightings afforded the notion an Occam's razor kind of plausibility. Hammock had almost convinced himself he had his answer when the first blob-like thing appeared. Part 2. Frown deepening, Hammock put the binoculars to his eyes again and brought the odd thing into fine focus. He said, puzzled. "It's certainly not a grey whale," Louise's voice whispered. "It's far too small and looks like something else." Well, Hammock saw what she meant. The blob thing was closer in size to a half-sunken Austin Mini than a surface whale, and its exterior was more gelatinous than dense, bearing a translucence that made Hammock think it might have been part of the jellyfish family, a notion he swiftly rejected when he noticed the bevy of small, shimmering orbs that riddled its clearish outer layer. "Hey, ever seen a jellyfish with those?" Well, in 50-plus years of seafaring, Hammock had seen his share of jellyfish, or sea jellies as they were sometimes called. Not once in all that time had he encountered a sea jelly with orbs like those. "No," he said, readjusting the binoculars' fine focus to gain a sharper view of the blob thing. It wasn't much of an improvement, but it was enough to show Hammock that the orbs weren't so much shimmying as they were spinning. "Definitely not." As he watched, they spun faster and faster, then did something he could scarcely believe. They began radiating a soft luminescence that swirled into colorful pinwheels of light. "Definitely not," his dead wife's voice echoed. A calmness fell over Hammock as he ogled the pinwheels. Something in the way they glowed and swirled made him want to watch them forever. They were good and peaceful creatures who only wished to commune with mankind. Later on, when he attempted to reflect on the incident, Hammock failed to recall how long he'd stood there in that spellbound state. It was like someone had taken a crappy eraser to the memory, leaving behind a vague smudge whose contents would be interpreted in several conflicting ways. In one instance, he remembered gawking for just a few seconds. In another, he recalled the episode lasting 20 minutes. However long it went on, the spell was eventually broken by a seagull who landed on the boat's wheelhouse and began squawking like its feet were on fire. "What the fuck?" Hammock uttered as he jumped from his seat and clambered to the back of the Maycraft. The bird disregarded his inquiry and continued with its frenetic squawking. Noticing that its squawks weren't directed at him, Hammock looked back out at the water and discovered that its companion had landed on top of the blob thing. Judging by its frenetic head movements, Hammock got the impression that it wasn't pleased to find itself there. This impression was validated moments later when the bird started cawing and flapping its wings wildly. Given the intensity of the flapping, Hammock expected it to shoot up into the sky and fly away. When it didn't, he used the binoculars to diagnose why. "Holy hell," he thought in his own voice this time. "Its feet are buried in the blob thing. They're trapped. It's trapped." He no sooner thought this than the poor bird stabbed its beak into the gelatinous material and tried to dig itself out. Hammock thought this a sensible tactic, until the bird jerked its head upwards and released a high-pitched shriek. The seagull perched on the wheelhouse countered the lament with a shriek of its own. "Hey!" Hammock shouted, stomping his foot on the boat's fiberglass deck for emphasis. "Stop that, you crazy twit." The seagull flinched at the admonishment and did as Hammock instructed. Realizing the other seagull had gone silent as well, Hammock returned his gaze to the spot where it and the blob thing had just been. "What?" he said, not seeing either one. "Where'd they go?" His feathered friend emitted a querulous chirp and blinked vapidly at him. Presuming they'd gone under, but hoping they hadn't, Hammock spent the next 5 minutes scanning the entire seascape surrounding the Maycraft, starting at the point where his fishing line went into the water and moving in a slow 360. When he got all the way round, he turned to his avian guest and broke the bad news. "Sorry, pal," he said. "They're gone." The bird's head twitched and twitched as its pea-sized brain strove to ascertain why it couldn't locate its companion. Its lack of understanding plucked at Hammock's heartstrings. After Louise had passed, he'd been an absolute mess and kept trying to rationalize her absence as some big, miserable joke. He kept thinking that one day she'd come strolling through the front door, laughing about the grand solo adventure she'd just returned from. "Yeah, it's a hard pill to swallow," he told it. "But who knows? Maybe it just flew away and plans on coming back later." The seagull paused its jerky movements and cawed inquisitively. For reasons beyond his comprehension, the bird's solemnity unnerved him no end and made him want to pack it in for the day. Something was amiss here today, in this part of the Sound, something to do with the gelatinous mass and the trapped seagull, something in those pinwheeling lights. "Hey, time to scoot, Hammock." It was Louise's voice again. "Don't dawdle. Get your ass in gear and move, like pronto." Having long since learned to obey such strong intuitions, Hammock stowed his binoculars in his backpack and readied the boat for departure. When everything was properly stored and secured, he scurried into the wheelhouse and reeled in the anchors. "Jesus," he said as he fired at the Maycraft's engines. "What'd I get myself into?" As the boat lurched forward, the seagull hopped down off the wheelhouse and parked itself near the aft storage compartment. It was visibly shaken, shivering intermittently as it stood there, with his eyes darting back and forth like the sole survivor of a mass shooting. Though Hammock kept expecting it to fly away, it stayed put for the entire ride back and didn't take flight until the boat approached Deer Island. "Hey, nice knowing you," Hammock called out as it flew north along the shoreline. He wondered, abstractly, if it would ever find its original flock, and if not, would it simply assimilate with a new one? Supposing it didn't matter one way or another, Hammock eased the boat into the marina and focused on getting his ass home, where it was safe. The next morning, Edwin joined him for breakfast at Sally's, the finest diner in this North Boston suburb of Malden. Meeting up there on Saturday mornings had become a ritual of theirs since Louise had passed. She'd been close friends with Sally and loved the menu, so it made sense for the two men to share regular meals there in her honor. "So," Edwin said, eyeing Hammock's plate, which boasted a healthy egg white omelette and a cup of mixed fruit. "How's, your food?" Hammock took a sip of his orange juice and peered at his son. After blood work from a recent checkup revealed dangerous levels of bad cholesterol, Hammock's doctor had prescribed a regimen of heart-healthy foods, along with a beta blocker and a daily statin. "Delicious," he said. "How's your pancakes and sausage and all that other shit?" Edwin worked as a forklift operator down at the Conley container terminal and owned a 6'4", 250-pound frame. As such, he always walked through Sally's door with the appetite of a lumberjack. Heavenly. The extra eggs, bacon, and hash browns were a good call. Hammock grunted. "You know, if I could go back in time and tell my younger self to eat healthy..." "You would in a heartbeat?" Edwin finished. "Yes, boy, I would." "Pop, I'm in my mid-40s, been eating like this forever. My cholesterol was a little high at my last physical, sure, but the rest was great. I don't know, maybe I'm just made of sterner stuff." "Suit yourself," said Hammock. "Just know it catches up on you in a flash." Edwin ingested a defiant mouthful of scrambled eggs and smiled at his father. "Noted. Now, if we're past all that, go first and tell me about your week." Catching up on each other's week had always been the linchpin of their Saturday morning ritual. "My week," Hammock said, the corners of his mouth ticking upwards. When he got to the part about co-workers shitting themselves, Edwin laughed heartily enough to draw curious looks from the nearby tables. "Holy shit, Pop, that's bananas." Hammock didn't mind the looky-loos. For once, he knew most of Sally's other regulars. For another, he loved his son's booming laugh. Sometimes just hearing it made the struggle of life bearable. He finished with a bit about the workers quitting on Friday, then handed the virtual conch to Edwin. "And, how was your week?" Edwin set down his fork and sighed. "Nothing worth mentioning job-wise. The family front is a whole other story." He went on to explain that his ex, Allison, had gotten a new job in Kingsport and told him she planned on moving that direction, with their son, Jacob, over the summer. "With her having custody, there's not much I can do, which means my time with him is about to take a hit. How big a hit depends on where she finds a house. I asked her to consider somewhere halfway, like Lynn or even Salem, but she seems dead set on settling in Kingport proper." Sorry to hear that, Eddie," Hammock said. "I barely see the lad myself as it is." Edwin downed the rest of his coffee. "I know, Pop, I know. That's why I figure, unless you have plans, we should take the boat out to Broad Sound today. Get in some fishing, drink some beer, maybe forget about our troubles for the day." Hammock arched a single bushy eyebrow and squinted at his son. Funny you should say that. You think my week was wild? Get a load of this." Well, a wisp of consternation passed across Edwin's face as he processed his father's story. "I know how it sounds," Hammock said, "but I know what I saw." "What you saw isn't bothering me," Edwin told him. "It's the time loss you described." Hammock simpered at his son. "I'm telling you, Eddie, last night when I was driving home, I couldn't work out how long I was staring at the stupid swirls. It's almost like they hypnotized me somehow." "Pop?" "Of course, with some basic math, I worked out that it was only 5 or 6 minutes I'd lost. Except it seemed like less and more at the same time." "Pop!" "Hang on, Eddie," Hammock fired back. "Now hang on a minute, look. I know what you're thinking and, Oh?" Edwin interjected. "What am I thinking?" "You're thinking that I'm right around the age your grandpa was when his dementia cropped up. But that ain't this. What I found out there was different." Hammock drew in a breath and released it slowly. How about we just set all that aside for now and go out there together, see what we see. If the blob thing shows up again, you can make your own assessment. If it doesn't, I'll be happy to revisit this whole dad's starting to lose it business. Deal? We'll revisit it either way, Edwin declared, leaving no room for argument. All right, fine, Hammock said. Either way, then. Edwin harpooned a thick, syrupy slab of pancake with his fork and took his time chewing it. It's really too bad you didn't get a picture of it. Your mom would have smacked the food out of your mouth if she was sitting here. Edwin swallowed his food and wiped his mouth with a napkin. It's really too bad you didn't get a picture of it. Yeah, Hammock said. No shit. My cell was in my backpack, but it never occurred to me to grab it. Not until I was halfway back to Deer Island, and by that point I just wanted to get the hell out of Dodge. Edwin shrugged a single shoulder and eyed the tab for their meal, which the waitress, Jenna, had somehow snuck onto the table while they were busy gabbing. All right, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this one's yours. Hammock grabbed the slip of paper and appraised the total. Making out like a bandit with these, ain't you? Well, I'm not sure what you mean, Edwin said, grinning. Hammock got out his wallet and browsed through his credit cards. Regular Arthur Hoggett, you are not. Edwin's considerable eyebrows formed a sharp V. The guy from Babe? Just get the tip, Hammock said, and headed for the register. Part 3. They reached the coordinates Hammock had saved at 2:15. The conditions mimicked those of the previous afternoon, cool with a slight breeze, and sunny save for a smattering of clouds gathered near the eastern horizon. Once they had the anchors in place and the Maycraft stabilized, they each cast out a fishing line. Just the two? Edwin inquired. The two of them typically handled at least 2 lines apiece, sometimes 3. Correct, Hammock said. Any reason why? Might be a bit superstitious, but I'm thinking we ought to recreate the situation from yesterday as closely as possible. Eyes hidden behind dark aviator glasses, Edwin stared at his father and debated how strongly he wanted to question the man. Again, why? Hammock sat in his fishing chair and watched the starboard line. To give us the best chance of running across it again. Edwin shook his head and unfolded one of the sturdier camping chairs they owned. While it would have been nice to have a second fixed seat on the boat, installing one had never been much of a priority since the camping chair worked just fine, so long as the waves weren't too choppy and you put on a non-slip mat down first. You're the boss, he said, and sat down. They spent the next hour drinking Old Milwaukee and chatting about Jacob, who was still in high school, nearing the end of his sophomore year. When Edward had spoken to him on Wednesday, the kid had expressed misgivings about completing his junior and senior years at a whole new school. He was worried about not knowing anyone, and he didn't like the fact that he'd only get to hang out with his current group of friends every other weekend. Well, I mentioned it to Allison, Edwin said, and she didn't seem too concerned. Claimed the move would benefit him, just like all the moving around she'd done as a kid had benefited her. Allison's father had served in the army and changed bases every 3 to 4 years. Hammock chuckled. Oh, yeah, made her a real peach of a woman, didn't it? Edwin cracked open a fresh beer and snorted. It sure should have. Don't worry, Hammock said. Between the two of us, we can help make sure he gets enough time with his friends. With any luck, he'll find a chick he likes in Kingsport High, and everything will be fine. God willing, Edwin replied. After downing his 4th beer, he sneered at his fishing line and gave the reel 5 hard cranks. It hadn't registered so much as a twitch since he'd cast it, which he found peculiar. The sound was well stocked with mackerel and bass, and he couldn't recall the last time he hadn't gotten at least a couple of hits within the first half hour. He was about to mention this to his father when Hammock shot up from his chair and exclaimed, Told you. Shit on a shingle, didn't I tell you? Edwin twisted around in his chair and looked at his father. What are you on about? What the hell else? Hammock snapped, holding his binoculars to his eyes with one hand while pointing with the other. "Come on, look for yourself." Edwin got up and gingerly crossed the deck to the starboard handrail. Cupping a hand across his forehead to block out the sun's glare, he tracked his father's finger to a section of water about 20 yards from the Maycraft. All he saw there were thousands of tiny waves, each glinting with sunlight. "Pop," he said, "I'm not sure He trailed off there as his eyes locked on a clearish object, thereabouts the size of an industrial fridge, floating 10 yards away from the boat. The seawater around it fizzled like champagne, and its gelatinous exterior was riddled with pinwheels of spinning light. It was the most enchanting sight Edwin had ever encountered in the Sound. Its kaleidoscopic colors gave him comfort, easing all his aches and pains. And the more he stared at it, the more connected he felt to the fabric of the universe. "Shit," he muttered. "Yeah." Hammock lowered the binoculars and inched forward, positioning himself beside his son. "You see what I mean, then?" "I do," Edwin said, "but, Pop—" Without taking his eyes off it, Edwin motioned towards the blob-like thing that ensnared his gaze. "Is this here what you meant? I thought you were pointing at something further out." Hammock transferred his attention to Edwin's discovery. "Christ almighty, there's 2 of the bastards?" "Apparently." Hammock clapped his son on the shoulder. Who's crazy now?" Edwin removed the bucket hat he was wearing, revealing an unkempt swathe of reddish hair, and scratched his equally reddish beard. "I never said you were crazy, Pop." "It was implied," Hammock said. "Anyway, this one's got the spinning light business going on too, huh?" "It does," Edwin said. He endeavored to look away from the glowing pinwheels, but something in his mind made him want to keep on looking. For hours and days, for years and decades. Until the end of time, if he could swing it. "Damn it," he growled, forcibly shutting his eyes. The pinwheeling sway instantly faded, though hundreds of after-images whirled in the dark behind his eyelids. "What's wrong?" Hammock asked him, the tint of his sunglasses somehow nullifying the pinwheeling's effects. Edwin recounted what had just occurred. "It's exactly like you said." "Again, not crazy." Edwin rolled his eyes and flitted a hand at the closer blob thing. "They're like the jellyfish version of that one fish. The one that can transfix its prey by changing the color of its scales. I forgot what they're called." "A cuttlefish," Hammock submitted. "That's it," Edwin said, snapping his fingers. "Cuttlefish, only weirder." Hammock internalized what his son was saying and sized up the further away blob thing. "I was thinking that too, but jellyfish don't light up like these bad boys do, and they don't get nearly as big." Edwin panned across the ocean's shimmering surface. During his senior year in high school, he dated a girl named Mazzy Cantrell, who was obsessed with the world's oceans and the myriad life forms they contained, particularly those living in what she called the down deep, where sunlight was alien and the pressures were unfathomable. "Edwin," he remembered her once saying, "there are monsters down there that no one's ever seen, monsters we can't even fathom, the stuff of dreams and nightmares." Well, as he perused the watery milieu, her words came floating back to him. "Not only that," Hammock added, "we have no clue how many more of these sons of bitches are out there." Edwin flipped his bucket hat back on and bobbed his head in agreement. "How about we do some recon?" Hammock gave him the thumbs up, and together they worked their way around the Maycraft, eventually meeting at the bow. All told, they spotted 8 additional blob things, bringing the total count to 10. Hammock whistled as they returned to the rear of the boat. "Well, if there's 10, there's bound to be a shit ton more. The question now is, what the hell are they?" Edwin hooked his thumbs through a couple of his jeans' belt loops and mulled it over. "I get you doubting they're jellyfish. Well, what if they're a rare kind of jellyfish, or a kind that hasn't been documented yet?" Hammock pursed his lips. "I reckon both are possible. they're undocumented, there's a chance we get credit for discovering them. Not sure about the rules, but they'd probably even name the species after us. Edwin scratched his beard again. The Kellerman jellyfish. What are the odds? Slim to none, Hammock conceded. But you never know. I say we take a bunch of pics, grab a sample if we can, and figure out the rest from here. Edwin concurred, and together they got to work taking dozens of photos of the gelatinous masses. Since Edwin's iPhone had the better camera, he took the majority of the zoomed-in shots. After reviewing their handiwork and deeming it satisfactory, they decided to move the boat closer to the nearest blob thing to grab a sample. "Right, I'll get the anchors, you get the poles," Hammock said as he headed for the wheelhouse. Edward started to reel in the portside fishing line when he noticed a series of large bubbles rising to the surface next to the Maycraft. "Hey, Pop, wait," he cried, leaning over the railing. "I think one's coming up right here." "Really?" Hammock said, scrabbling to the aft storage compartment where he retrieved a length of rope, a set of rubber gloves, and a small bucket. The bubbles steadily increased in volume and frequency, making the sea off the port side seem as if it were boiling. Edwin had the presence of mind to begin recording the phenomenon with his phone. "Right, when it comes up," he said, "we'll have to be careful how long we look at it, with that light bullshit thing they do." Hammock mentioned how the sunglasses had seemed to curtail their influence. "Hey, if you brought any, get 'em out now." Handing his phone to his father, Edwin quickly rummaged through the satchel he'd brought, but came up empty for his Ray-Bans. "I think I left 'em in the truck," he said, taking his phone back. "Not to worry," Hammock declared. "I'll do the direct looking. You just capture it through the phone. If that doesn't work, try your peripherals." "That makes sense." "Not really," Hammock said. "This whole ordeal is like something out of the Twilight Zone. Real Rod Serling shit. Well, it'll be fine. Nothing the Kellerman boys can't handle." Edwin put his arm across Hammock's shoulders and gave the man a gentle squeeze. "Glad you told me about this, Pop. Well, I'm glad we're here together today. After everything with Mom and Allison, I know, son, I know," Hammock whispered. "It's you and me till the very end, right?" Suppressing the emotions he could feel rising within him, Edwin dropped his arm and focused on recording the agitated waters. The bubbling reached a crescendo 2 minutes later and converted into the champagne-like fizzing. A minute after that, another blob-like thing breached the surface. This one was smaller than the others, maybe 4 feet at its widest, 3 feet at its narrowest. Its edges formed an irregular oval shape, and its translucent exterior reminded Hammock of the clear pudding his mother used to make when he was a boy. Only this stuff was infused with small brown spheres. "Seen those yesterday," he said, canting over the handrail. "Not sure what they are." Edwin studied the spheres with the phone's display. "Me neither," he said, zooming in on a couple. As he did, they began to vibrate and spin, generating the pinwheeling light. Though his instincts told him to look elsewhere, Edwin stayed the course and kept watching them through the iPhone. The lights spun and changed as they had before, but they had no effect on him. "That seems okay with the camera." "You give me a heads up if that changes," said Hammock. He put the gloves on and tied the rope to the bucket's handle. "Not sure how this'll go. If it's alive, the bucket will probably bounce off it. If not, maybe I can scoop up a smidge." "Go for it." Hammock dropped the bucket into the water next to the new blob thing and yanked it right to left. Meeting no resistance, the bucket cut through the translucent outer layer like a spoon through custard, scooping up a respectable chunk of it. Edwin half expected the blob thing to react to the assault, but it remained completely inert, save for the pinwheeling lights. With a whoop of triumph, Hammock pulled the bucket back into the Maycraft and set it onto his fishing chair. "Went right through the sucker." "Sure did," Edwin said. "Got more than a smudge, too." He stopped the recording, and they both peered down at their prize. Up close, the sampling resembled a slab of opaque jello infused with raisins. Its outer layer bore deep, coral-like corrugations, throughout which ran a spiderweb of thin, white filaments. Actually, Edwin observed as he moved his face closer to the bucket, those filaments appeared to run through the entire sample, with the thicker ones interconnecting the brown spheres. "Hey, take off your sunglasses and have a gander," he told his father. Noting that the spheres were no longer producing light, Hammock removed his aviators and leaned nearer. He spotted the filaments right away and was fascinated by their complexity. He was especially interested in the strands that ran between the spheres, for they somewhat reminded him of the mesh network he managed at Escu. "What did you suppose all this crap's for?" Edwin asked. "Hard to say," replied Hammock. "But now I'm a little worried it's a biological function, like a circulatory or nervous system." He stopped short as a series of tiny blue arcs materialized along the thicker strands and started pulsing back and forth between the spheres. The pulsing repeated twice more before the blue arcs brightened briefly and flickered out. A millisecond after that, the whole sample turned gray and sallow. "Ah, shit, Pop," Edwin said breathlessly. "Was that electrical activity? Did we just kill whatever this is?" Not waiting for a reply, he darted to the port side railing and re-examined the sample's source. The ovular blob thing was still there, but it had gone cloudy and grey and appeared to be leaking dark fluid from the gash they'd inflicted. Not only that, but Edwin swore he heard a faint melody emanating from it. He turned around and looked at his father. "I hear it too, boy," Hammock said as the nebulous melody rose in pitch. It was a sorrowful noise, ancient and penetrating, containing intonations and resonances that their brains innately recognized as having evolved in the grand nothingness between galaxies. It was an exuberant sound, a song of awakening, and its playing portended the stirring of things that had been dreaming since beyond the earth had fully formed. Edwin clutched a hand to his stomach and suddenly retched with nausea. "Fucking hell, Pop. It's making me sick." Hammock felt the nausea too and spat up a bellyful of old Milwaukee. Luckily, he had the wherewithal to chuck it into the sea instead of all over the deck. "Oh, God in heaven," spitting bile. "Me too." "We need to leave," Edwin groaned, throwing the fishing poles into the water. "This is all wrong." Without waiting for a response, he stumbled into the wheelhouse and fired up the engines. Once the anchors were up and the sample bucket was aptly stowed, he guided the boat in a wide arc, avoiding the blob-like things, and headed west, towards Boston. After motoring along for 5 minutes and no longer feeling sick, Hammock made Edwin stop the boat so they could talk without having to shout over the engines. Edwin obliged, but opted not to deploy the anchors. No, Hammock said. "Just a few minutes to think about what to do next." Unsteady on his feet, Edwin parked his butt in Hammock's fishing chair and slumped forward. "What was that goddamn music?" "I don't know, son." "It made me see space. Like, outer fucking space. I think I was starting to understand where everything came from." "Same here." Edwin wiped the drool from his chin. "So, what do we do now?" "Working on it." They both retreated into silence as Hammock deliberated their quandary. A handful of untenable ideas presented themselves before the solution struck him like a punch to the head. "Of course," he said. "Been staring me in the face the whole time." "What has?" "Not what, who," Hammock said. "Have I ever mentioned an old college buddy of mine from MU, Abe Teller? Everybody calls him Telly." Edwin ruminated on it. "Did you and Mum sometimes play poker at his house when I was a kid?" "Yeah, every so often." "I don't remember what he looks like, but yeah." You wouldn't. Last time he came to the house, you'd have been 6 or 7. In any case, Telly majored in marine sciences at Miskatonic, and after graduation got a job working at Northwestern University's Marine Science Center up in Nahant Harbor. If anyone knows what this is, it's Telly. If not him, then someone he works with. Edwin rubbed his face and nodded. "Sounds good to me. Nahant's what, 20 minutes north?" "Yeah, about that," Hammock said, entering the wheelhouse. Next to the GPS unit sat an older model marine radio. He picked up the handset and switched the gizmo on. Alright, I'll see if I can get the center on the radio. If I can't, we'll just go there and talk to someone in person. Okay, sure, Edwin said. Let's start there. Hammock dragged a hand across his sweating forehead and cracked open his frequency binder. He was sure the center's digits were in there somewhere. Part 4. Well, the binder did in fact have the center's frequency, and with it, they were able to reach the center. By pure happenstance, Telly was there, running tests he hadn't been able to run on Friday. His ever-jubilant friend seemed keenly interested in their discovery and agreed to receive them personally when they arrived at Dorothy Cove. True to his word, Telly was there waiting for them when they pulled into the Cove's small marina. Following a hearty round of hugs and handshakes, it had been eons since Hammock had last seen his old friend. He handed Telly the bucket. Slipping on his bifocals, the tall, gangly scientist set the bucket on the ground and gave the sample a lengthy look-see. Definitely organic, he stated. Similar to the mesoglia of jellyfish, but not quite the same. Mind if we take this back to the lab? Pay the docking fee and you're on, Hammock said. Telly laughed, said he'd already paid the fee, and they all piled into his beat-up Jeep Wrangler. It was past 4 by the time they got to the center. The place was a ghost town. Telly brought them straight to his lab, where he hastily set up a row of test tubes and filled them with various chemicals and reagents. To each he added equal portions of what he called the test substance. Reactions occurred in some and not in others. Documenting his findings on a small tablet device, Telly prepared a couple of slides and began examining the substance microscopically. He said several times as he fiddled with his high-tech microscope's adjustments. There was a large monitor above the setup with cables running to the microscope, but he didn't bother utilizing it. When he was finished, Telly regarded Hammock and Edwin with a queer expression, then strode across the lab to its furthest wall, where a large map of Broad Sound was mounted. Hammock, could you show me here on the map where you found the substance? Hammock went to the map and tapped a finger on a spot near the Sound's outer fringe. Right about here. But we have the exact coordinates. He glanced at his friend. So, what's up, Telly? What'd those tests tell you? Removed his bifocals and ran a hand through his side-parted hair. Inconclusive, I'm afraid. I'd like to do some more testing at the site. He peered at Hammock. Think you'd be willing to take me back out there in the morning? Now the center will pay for the fuel. Got a nice expense card for that. And I can bring some equipment out with us. Maybe get some more definitive answers. Hammock studied his friend's face closely. He sensed the man was holding something back, but he wasn't overly concerned. Although he and Telly weren't as close as they used to be, he still trusted the man and expected he would disclose what he knew when the time was right. You bet, Hammock said. He pulled out his phone and showed Telly all the pics. Edwin did the same. As for the enigmatic music and swirling lights, they decided to keep those tidbits for themselves for the time being. Telly thanked them repeatedly for reaching out to him as he walked them back down to the marina. Getting ready to investigate new aquatic species is the best part of my job, he related. And if you don't mind, I'd like to set out from here at sunup. No problem, Hammock said. You bring the Duncan, we'll bring the boat. Done, said Telly. See you boys bright and early. For convenience sake, Edwin stayed the night at his father's house, sleeping in his old childhood bedroom, which hadn't changed much in the 2 decades since he'd left home. The walls even bore most of the posters he'd put up as an angsty teen. Posters of bands like the Deftones, Tool, and Rage Against the Machine, and movies like Pulp Fiction, True Romance, and Reservoir Dogs. As they sat at the kitchen table, eating the steaks Hammock cooked up, Edwin asked his father why he never renovated the room. Your ma insisted on leaving it as it is, Hammock explained. So you'd feel at home whenever you needed to stay over. Plus, it's not like we ever get guests. Everyone we know lives close by. And they get a new mattress, though. After dinner, they watched Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy together, and then decided to call it an early night. Now, despite the new mattress, Edwin's slumber wasn't remotely restful, as bad dreams plagued him all night long. He woke several times with that troubling melody echoing in his ears, and each time he had to switch on the light to make sure the floor wasn't crawling with gelatinous masses. Hammock fared no better, struggling with nightmares of his own, and welcome his alarm clock's buzzing when it went off at 4:30. Neither one of them was interested in chatting as they made their way to Deer Island. To keep it from being too awkward, Edwin tuned the radio to a soft rock station and let the classic tunes distract him from the dark thoughts that kept vying for attention. Due to the early hour, the boat launch at Deer Island was completely deserted, a rarity that allowed them to get the Maycraft straight into the water. The sun had just begun to peek over the eastern horizon when they pulled into Dorothy Cove. Tully was there waiting for them, with Duncan in hand, as promised. On the dock next to him sat a large gas can, an equally large duffel bag, and a silver trunk labeled Mobile Lab. "Yeah, good morning, gents," he said as they sidled up to the dock. "Oh, that it is, my friend," Hammock muttered tiredly. "Now hand me those coffees so I can think straight." Tully handed Hammock the styrofoam cups while Edwin set to work loading the other items on board. "The gas and the can are yours to keep," Tully said as he stepped onto the boat. "Small token of the center's appreciation." "We humbly accept," Hammock told him after a long sip of coffee. Edwin pushed the Maycraft away from the dock and gently backed the boat into the cove. They reached the outer fringe of Broad Sound at 6:15. And during the ride out, they only saw one other boat, a smaller Tiara yacht, though they didn't see anyone on deck. Edwin stopped the Maycraft at the saved coordinates and deployed the anchors. Telly, outfitted in fisherman-esque khakis, a flannel shirt and black galoshes, gravitated to the front of the boat and eagerly commenced surveying the waters. "See anything yet?" Hammock called out. Not yet," Telly replied, lifting the high-tech binoculars he brought with him. "You sure this is the right location?" He said it casually, almost jokingly, but Hammock detected an undertone of impatience mixed in with the man's words. "Yeah, I'm sure," Hammock said, moving to the starboard side. He held a hand up, blocking out the sun, and set to scanning the countless little waves. Not even a minute later, Edwin shouted out in alarm. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph! One of them's right here!" He positioned himself at the rear of the boat and was staring down at the water directly behind the Maycraft's dual Yamahas. Edwin and Telly flocked to his sides and looked. One of the blob things was indeed there, floating mere feet away from the stilled motors. Its spheres were inactive. "Hey, did we run over it?" Telly asked with a scowl. "Nah," Edwin said. "Would have felt that." A swirl of trepidation coiled in Hammock's bowels as he watched 3 more of the blobs bubble to the surface at varying distances from the boat. That was quick. "What was?" Telly asked. Hammock showed him. There, and there. Countenance going taut, Telly clasped his hands together gleefully and started whispering to himself. "Hey, what are you saying there?" Ignoring him, Telly withdrew from the rear of the boat and went to the forward storage compartment, where he'd stored his silver trunk. He set it on the deck, popped its latches, and opened the lid, revealing the foam-padded contents of his mobile lab. A ruggedized microscope, 2 handheld analyzers, and a bunch of test cartridges. He removed the entire lot, shut the trunk, and suction-cupped the microscope to the trunk's surface. "Hey, Hammock," he said, inserting the test cartridges into the analyzers and returning to the rear of the Maycraft. "Would it be possible for you to get another sample for me?" Hammock found another bucket and did as Telly asked, choosing the blob-like thing behind the engines. In the meantime, Edwin procured his own set of binoculars from the Maycraft's wheelhouse and headed for the bow, where he took up post watching the waters. For Hammock, the collection process went as smoothly as it had the first time. When the bucket was half full, he pulled it back into the boat and handed it to Telly. His friend took a couple of small samples, fed them into the cartridges, and initiated his tests. Shouldn't take but a couple of minutes," he said as he brought the bucket to the microscope, where he prepared a single slide and locked it onto the scope's stage. "Okay, gents," he said, putting his eyes to the scope's oculi while Hammock and Edwin looked on. "Here goes nothing." Save for the rhythmless lapping of waves against the Maycraft's hull, all was silent on the boat for close to 3 minutes. Then the analyzers beeped and Telly pulled away from the microscope to check the results. His face filled with wonderment as he reviewed them. Hammock, growing anxious, cleared his throat. "Talk to me, Abe. What's the situation?" Telly shook his head in what looked like amazed disbelief. "It's them," he said quietly. "They're real. I mean, I was raised to believe it all and saw hints here and there, but I don't think I ever really truly believed, even after what happened to..." He removed the slide from the microscope and tossed it into the ocean. "Raised to believe what?" Hammock queried. "You ain't making sense." Telly packed up the analyzers and the microscope in the trunk and restowed it in the forward compartment. He exchanged it for his duffel bag, which he anxiously toted to the rear of the boat. "Hammock, there's some things I need to share with you. Now, you're going to think I'm out of my tree, and rightly so. But please understand, I'm not pulling your leg. What I'm telling you is the God's honest truth." Hammock saw the seriousness in his friend's eyes and nodded. "All right, I'm listening." Although he'd told everyone at Miskatonic that he was from Ipswich, Telly's family actually hailed from a smaller town near Ipswich, one with a rather eldritch history. He didn't want to get into the weeds of it except to say his family, mainly his grandfather, was deeply involved in many of the town's drearier affairs. When he was 17, his father moved them to Ipswich in hopes of starting over. Soon after the move, Telly joined the Navy to further distance himself from all of it. After a single enlistment, he left the service and used his GI Bill at MU. Hours after getting his diploma, he received a call from his father that brought him racing back to Ipswich. The family's ties with the other town, it seemed, had re-emerged in recent months, and his mother and sister had fallen prey to what Telly cryptically referred to as elements of the old war. "Oh, my dad was devastated, as was I," said Telly. He took a breath. Because of the injuries he'd suffered while trying to protect my mom and my sister from what came, said it was upon me to balance the scales, if I could, and he gave me all the tools I'd needed to do so. Telly reached into his duffel bag and withdrew an old book that reminded Hammock of the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead movies. Now, the things that took my mother and sister have their own enemies, many in fact. He looked at the sky before glancing down at the ocean. "In there." He directed his gaze to the new sample Hammock had procured. "There." Hammock's brow furrowed. "I'm not following you, buddy." Telly brandished a grim smile. "They came a very long time ago, and I think they were trapped down there under the crust. I think last week's earthquake jarred open the earth and set them free. They've been slowly waking since." Hammock stared at his old friend. "Wait, what earthquake?" "That was a small one, barely reported by the news," Telly said, "but it struck in just the right place." He laughed. "Such providence." At the boat's bow, Edwin dropped his binoculars and peered nervously at Hammock. "Pop," he shouted, slipping on his sunglasses. "There's more. Oh, they're everywhere. Look." Hammock browsed the surrounding waters and was alarmed to see thousands more of the gelatinous masses had surfaced. "Oh, fuck me," he said, fumbling on his own shades. Telly opened the book. They're drawn to the words in this grimoire's passages. Questions swarmed through Hammock's head like angry bees. His eyes moved to the book. "What the hell do they do?" Many things," Telly replied, motioning towards the boundless opaque masses occupying the sound. "They're dead, in a way, and this'll help wake 'em up." Telly flipped to a page at the back of the book and started reading from it. His voice was low, practically a whisper. The words he spoke were foreign, guttural, commanding. His whisper soon transformed into a chant, and the blob-like things began to stir. The white filaments within each glowed bright, initiating a cascade of bioelectrical reactions that inspired the little brown specks to generate legions of the pinwheeling lights. "Hey, stop it," Hammock shouted. "Whatever you're doing, stop it." Around them, the sea grew bright with bioluminescence. Meanwhile, the gelatinous masses sprouted long, flailing protrusions, some which remained beneath the surface and worked to whip the sound into a frothy mess. Amid the disarray, Hammock's ears detected that ageless melody from before, whose voluminous timbres were forged in the furthest reaches of space and time. Decibel by decibel it filled the air, growing louder and louder. It was no longer sorrowful. No, it was angry, an angry and hungry sound. A war song. Feeling ill and fearing for his life, Hammock staggered to the boat's wheelhouse and attempted to engage the motors. Well, they struggled mightily to start, but wouldn't turn over. Edwin appeared beside him under the canopy and tried to help. It was no use. The gelatinous mass behind them was entwined in the propellers, preventing them from moving. In desperation, Hammock turned back towards Telly and beseeched the man to undo what was happening. Please, for me and Edwin's sake." "I can't," Telly stated, a strange resolve shining in his wet eyes. "I'm sorry about this. I truly am." He pointed at the pinwheeling lights. "As I understand it, it'll be easier, less painful, if you stare into those." Edwin went to say something, but before he could get a single word out, several of the longer protrusions sprang from the waters and rushed into the boat. They advanced like vipers, wrapping themselves around both Edwin and Hammock. Barbed, and no longer pudding soft, the clear protrusions squeezed hard, cutting into the men and lifting them high into the air. "Eddie!" Hammock cried. "Bob!" screamed Edwin. The protrusions quivered and tore them in half, letting their blood and entrails pour into the sea. "Ah, the ablation is delivered," Telly exclaimed. And all at once the waters around him stilled and the melody ceased. The former marine biologist pivoted on his heel and jabbed a finger towards the mainland. "Impetum," he commanded, coursing with adrenaline. The army of blob things vanished beneath the surface, including the one behind the boat, and thrashed their flagellate protrusions hard, propelling them towards New England, where the primordial conflict awaited. Telly watched them go, and spent the next half-hour calming himself down. He hadn't enjoyed doing what he'd just done to his friends, and their deaths weighed heavily on him. His father would have called their sacrifice a necessary evil, and rightly so, but that scarcely helped his grieving conscience. When he was finally in a clearer headspace, he got the boat running and plotted a course for Salem. He had to get to Ipswich as fast as possible, and after that Innsmouth. Oh, there was so much to do in the days ahead. The next phase of the war had begun, and he needed to prepare what remained of his family for the horrors soon to come. Well, that one definitely goes into the What on Earth Have I Just Read collection, I think. Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say about that story in the comments below the video, and as ever I will do my best to join in the conversation. Weird, wonderful, love the ones set at sea with mysterious creatures, I really do, and I hope you feel the same about it. Thanks in particular for recent comments regarding what I say at the end of these videos. I've been thinking about where to go, what to do next and everything. I'm getting a lot of feedback from you all. And to be honest, I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. I've always tried to make this a community, and it's pretty difficult when you don't show your face on YouTube. But I do try my best, and you all are appreciated, and there'd be no point in me doing this without you. Yeah? Okay. I'm probably going to be back again tomorrow night with maybe a new zombie film from the Zombie Outbreak series. Not promising that, definitely. See how tomorrow goes, but that's my plan right now. Till then, my dear friends, remember, it's just a story. Very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.